My name is Ben Eady. I'm the online media manager of ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Stand Up and Deliver Great Products with Collaborative Requirements. Today's featured speakers are Red Sturek and Yuri Walnick from Polarion, and the webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the Q&A session. I'd also like to say thank you to Polarion Software for sponsoring this event, and this time I'll turn it over to Yuri to get us started.
Thank you, Ben. You were already introduced. My name is Yuri Walnick. I'm a VP of Product Management. I'll start the session, and later I will pass my presentation to Reg, who will give us some also overview about not just requirements management, but also quality assurance side of a product development. Today's agenda is very, I would say, simple and straightforward. I would like to very, very shortly introduce Polarion. Then speak about structured requirements. I mean, what are the challenges with structuring your requirements? How to manage requirements properly? We will not forget about Agile. Then traceability, because I mean, requirements are just one part of all the artifacts we need to manage to deliver successful products. We'll speak how well structured requirements will at the end accelerate the quality, and we'll finish with some more information about how you can easily reuse requirements between different versions or variants, and what are the common challenges you need to handle when speaking about requirements reuse. We would kindly advise you to ask questions during the presentation. At the end of every chapter, we'll try to answer some of them, and of course, we'll have the dedicated Q&A session at the end. So, Polarion Software. Polarion Software is a leading innovator in web-based management requirements, management quality assurance, and ALM solutions since our first product release in 2004. So it has been 10 years this year since we are on the market. We serve companies of very different sizes and a broad spectrum of industries. And I would say that the unique differentiators include the fact that it's based on a single unified repository. It's 100% web-based, and this, of course, enables to streamline the collaboration, transparency, release predictability, and as well as very often improves the ability to comply with different regulatory standards. So, requirements. You know, there are many different problems and challenges. So when we speak about requirements and requirements management, and it's strange, I mean, that some of them are really pretty basic. I mean, what we often see is that requirements are not written. It doesn't mean that people do not write requirements, but the problem is that not all of them are written. A lot of requirements are simply expressed in an oral form, or they are just guessed. Requirements are not shared. It means that you can use, I mean, different tools to exchange requirements, but if different stakeholders have different versions, you can rely on the actual requirements definition to be shared by all the stakeholders. And at the end, I mean, requirements are not managed, so the actual change control is difficult. Very often it's simply broken, so not all the changes get to the final stakeholders or developers. What are the different kind of requirements before we really proceed further? I think it's very important to understand that there are really different kinds of them. First, I mean, there are requirements that are context related. These are mostly the functional and non-functional requirements that are part of requirement specification documents. And the most important about those requirements is that you can really understand the requirement without reading them in a context. And of course, you can have different requirements that are more like a standalone. A typical example of such a requirement is a use case or a business case. Simply, I mean, this needs to be understood without reading the use case in an actual container. And of course, some of them might be visual or textual. We'll speak today about all different kinds of requirements. And it's also very important, I mean, to understand that there are different techniques how to handle different kind of requirements. And I'll try to promote the differences. What we see on the market definitely is that many of you and many of our customers were using Microsoft Office documents to actually um, handle the specification of their products. And it's still very popular. And I would say that the most important reason why Microsoft Office documents are so popular is that it's very easy to use tool set, so you can express your ideas very quickly. And you can just start typing your requirements, your need. You can structure it easily into chapters. With Excel, I mean, the information is well structured, and you can also navigate easily around many different requirements. But the problem itself is that those tools do not allow a single requirements to be easily identified. So you could hardly um, link or navigate to some particular element in a Word document. More or less, I mean, what we try to do is to make requirements as short as possible. Because if you say that a full chapter in a Word document is a requirement, then it's very difficult at the end to measure a requirements coverage, because I mean, you see all the test cases linked to a chapter in a Word document, but I mean, this might be like tens or hundreds of different requirements. So principally, I mean, what a good requirements management tool needs to support is the ability to structure the requirements into single, unique, small, granular requirements. Of course, I mean, if you have the requirements such uniquely identified, you can then link the requirements between each other. And of course, you can link additional elements like test cases, issues, or tasks to a single work items. But very often, I mean, the content itself, I mean, the description of a need is not enough for to express all the necessary information that you need to link with a requirement. It means that we need to link additional meta information to requirements. What are all those meta informations? It can be, I mean, the information about risk level in the ISO 26262 process. It can be information related to which release this requirement is applicable to. And once we start asking those questions, we'll soon understand that these are different people who are actually writing the requirements and different people who are actually managing the requirements, that are providing the categorization, planning, assignments. And this often means that those people need different tools. But at the end, I mean, they don't need different tools, they need different views. And all what we will show you today is just the ability to have the single unified repository with requirements. And there is a different UI, different visual features exposed to the different roles. But it doesn't mean that they cannot really share requirements. Because I mean, if you are using, I mean, a web-based management solution, it really streamlined the collaboration, because any change in a document itself is instantly propagated to a different view that project managers can be actually using at the same time. Next slide, please. So I think in these days,
we actually have a question
okay, great.
before we move on. So, question was, let me just read it here. With your product that you showed, the screenshot, can you import MS Word documents and export?
Yes, as I said, I mean, we saw a lot of users who are using Microsoft Office documents to manage requirements. We try to build more or less the same UI in our web interface, but we also allow them to continue using the popular Office tools. So you can easily import the Office documents, you can export to Office both Word and Excel, and even more, you can import the changes back. In these days, whenever we speak about requirements or software system development, we see that lots of companies are adopting Agile methodology. And let me spend some time now just to highlight some of the differences between requirements and user stories. In general, let's start with the user stories, because the concept of the user story is pretty well understood. It's an order set of items that describes the actual increment in a product development. It's being formulated as a user story in user story language. But very, very important fact about the user story is that it must be feasible to implement, and it's more or less ready for the estimation by the R&D team. Contrary, when we speak about requirements, the requirements that are linked to the user story just provides additional structured input. We typically consider, that instead of having a very long definition of the user story with many acceptance criteria, many of the acceptance criteria can be more or less described as a set of structured requirements. Requirements can be prioritized, but we don't speak about ordering because they are very overlapping. And what's most important about requirements is that they should be very easy to write. So on one side, you have the user stories that are not so easy to write because you have many different expectations how the user stories are being formulated. And the most important thing is that it really describes the increments. And on the other hand, you should still manage your requirements that provide additional structured input. That's, a very some kind of a graphical explanation of the difference between the user stories and specification documents. So more or less, the user stories describes the dynamic of the system. So anytime you finish a user story, it can be more or less discarded, deleted, because there can be another user story that simply completely overrides the expectations of the first user story. On the other hand, the specifications are typically needs to be maintained when done, because the reality is that the code itself doesn't really help you to explain the complexity of your product. So the code is not the only way where how you need to describe the complexity of your products. Also, if you do have some component specification documents that are being maintained, it's much easier to reuse those specifications if you start another variant of your product, or simply ensures the consistency that when a new user story is being planned, you can reuse not just the code, but also the functional description, functional structured input for those new increments. So from the process point of view, you might have, business specification documents, epic requirement specification documents on the input. You translate them into the user story, so you have your backlog. And for the high level, for the most important user stories that are on the top of your backlog, you will more or less prepare the component, update the component specifications document. So in this model, in this process, at the end of the sprint, you of course have the potentially shippable product as it is provided by the modern agile process, but at the end of every sprint, you also have the updated product documentation. And the product documentation, it's not just a manual, but the component specification documents that helps keep the consistency of your products.
We have a question actually about Agile. Are the requirements traceable to the verification procedures?
Sure. I think that you will speak more about the actual quality assurance process related to requirements in your session. But yes, with Polarion, you can fully design your model, what artifacts you manage from requirements, user stories, tasks, verification procedures, test cases, and link them all together. One of the reasons why I was saying that it's important to have the structured requirements is that you need to have the requirements traceable to additional artifacts. When we speak about traceable, let's just briefly explain what a traceability is. I mean, the formal definition of the traceability refers to the completeness of the information about every step in the supply chain. Very often, I mean, there is a misunderstanding about traceability, just about ability to link items together. But we often say that the goal is not to link the test case with a requirement. The goal is to provide a proof that the requirement was implemented and actually verified. So it's not just important to have a solution where I can manage requirements and describe tests, but I need to give a proof that the requirement has been really verified. Based on the definition of the traceability we just seen, I mean, there are two major kinds of traceability. First is so-called historical traceability. Let's call it auditability. More or less ability to understand who, what, and when for any change. So typically, the solutions need to provide enough capabilities to version any kind of a change. Let me just mention here that it's pretty different in our solution because Polarion is storing all the information in the version control management system. So really to understand who, what, and when, it's being derived by the fact that that all the data are automatically versioned. If you speak about all the data, I don't know how many of you are actually requested to follow some regulatory standards, like for functional safety development. But if you need to do it, you need to also to not version just the artifacts, but also the actual process definition. And if that's also what is being very well supported by Polarion. It's mostly the concept of a time machine that you can browse, search, and report any historical state. But that's just, I mean, the very easy part of the traceability, auditability. Much more important is ability to link and trace different kind of artifacts. What kind of artifacts? We are already asked about traceability from the requirements to the test case, but there might be also additional design or specification documents. You might have a system requirement specifications being linked with the software functional requirement specification document or electromechanical specification documents. And whenever you start thinking about linking, it's very important to understand that we might also very likely face the situation that you need to link very large data scale. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean that there are thousands of requirements, up to 50,000 of requirements in a single project, and this makes the stuff much more difficult because then you need to perform different analysis to understand whether data are being linked or not. When we speak about linking and trace, of course, it's much easier, as with Polarion, if you have all the data in a single repository. But at the end, there are always some different third-party tools that needs to be linked and traced as well. As in this example, it's a MATLAB Simulink model for system modeling or UML diagram in an enterprise architect product. And one of the most important reasons why this artifact traceability or linking is important is ability to isolate the change and actually review the impact of a change before the change actually happens. Here's an example from one of the biggest German car manufacturers, from Daimler. They were expecting that once the requirement is being approved, it can be changed only if the modification of the specification was performed and approved in the sandbox. And after it is approved, the change is published to the main information repository. So that's a very formal process, how they want actually to first do the impact analysis in the sandbox, and once it's being done, it's being promoted to a main repository. All of that can be very well modeled in Polarion with via our workflow engine. What you see on the right side is the high-level requirement specification document workflow and the actual requirement work item workflow. Just to summarize, I mean, what is the relationship between documents and work items? I already shown you the full document screen, and the document is a container of a single requirements, work items, but also test cases, whatever. And when we speak about the change isolation, it's the ability to really control the change process via the workflow. So when we start with a requirement specification document, it's being first, for example, drafted, then you send it to review. When it's being in review, all the requirements are sent to the review as well. And I can approve the specification document only if all the requirements has been approved. So now, I mean, the specification is being approved. It's more or less read only, and whenever you need um, to modify the approved specification, and of course, change always happens. I mean, there are no projects that are being driven by the specification that was approved once and never changed. To allow people to modify the document again, you need to send it to a change draft, send it to review again, and you can approve a change only if all the modified requirements and all the new requirements have been again approved. That's just an example how the change process can be modeled in Polarion. It's very flexible. I mean, you can modify the workflow based on your conditions. But the reality is, I mean, that if you have the requirements traceable, if you have the requirements really granular and isolated, you can better model your change management process and ensure that the overall change is being change consistency is being handled by the workflow definition. One note about linking additional models, about model-based design. Very often, I mean, what we see is that that there's just ability to link models, no matter we speak about system models or software models, with requirements. So you might have some functional requirement specification document and link it with the models that you do in Simulink or Enterprise Architect. But what we found very important is, even though, I mean, a third-party tool is being used for modeling to publish the results, the models, into Polarion as a visual artifacts. So I can perform the impact analysis. So I can, for example, in this case, estimate the impact of a change on the final product or on the model just by browsing the requirements online in a web browser. I don't need actually to open the model in a UML tool or system modeler, because a lot of the impact can be just analyzed on the web just with analyzing the published visual representation of my model.
Yurji, before we pass the torch over to me, there is a final question about linking. The question is can links be versioned?
Yes, I mean, the link is more or less an artifact in Polarion repository. As I said, all the artifacts in our repository are fully versioned, so the links are versioned as well. But there is also one additional view on links, and this is that you can link more. You know, that you have two artifacts, and you can have a link from one artifact to the other. But you can also link some specific version of your artifacts. So first, the links are versioned, but also the links can point to some specific versions of requirements, test cases, or whatever artifacts we speak about. Thank you.
All right. As Ben mentioned, my name is Reg Struck. I'm a colleague of Yurji's and also a product manager at Polarion Software. My area of expertise is in quality assurance. I do manage the business unit for quality assurance as well as technology partner integrations. So to provide some context, what I'd like to talk about today is, in further to requirements, is the testing area. I'll discuss how software testing is a key component that really should be tightly integrated with your requirements and your requirements process during the verification stage. So we'll talk about verification. So what is verification? It's software testing, really what it is, but more importantly, what it does is it ensures the product is designed to deliver intended use and behavior based on your requirements. What it does is you want to make sure that the product does what it's supposed to do and that it's built right. And then obviously the end game is to make sure that you reduce errors, minimize, hopefully get rid of all the errors, software errors, commonly known as bugs. An example that I'd like to use in context of everyday world is building a motorcycle. And when you build a motorcycle, verification would be you need to verify what kind of motorcycle it is, how it's being assembled, if it works properly, the color, the type of fuel it uses, the size, et cetera, et cetera. So that, in comparison, is what we mean by verification in the software world. So there are actually, in software testing, 4 levels of what we call verification software testing. And those 4 levels start with module. And what we mean by that is we verify, so commonly known would be unit testing, but in layman's terms, we verify implementation of component or even a set of components that they are correct based on your requirements. So using the motorcycle analogy again, we could say that the motorcycle seat would be a module to test that that is actually implemented correctly. Second is integration, is the second level of verification for software testing. And what that is it's a set of components that are integrated together, and we test those. They are usually both software and hardware, but if we use the analogy of, again, using the motorcycle, what that would mean is, for example, is the wheels, the tires, and the spokes would be an integration component. Third is a system, and that is the entire ecosystem of your product. So making sure that the entire ecosystem meets its specified requirements. So the entire motorcycle, for example. And then lastly, which is sometimes optional in verification of software testing, is the acceptance testing. And what we mean by that is you verify that all of the general predefined acceptance criteria meets all of your requirements. And that acceptance criteria is usually defined by your technology people, so the software engineers, your product management, your business analysts, and obviously the key stakeholders on the outside, which is ultimately your customers. So next is, where does verification fit in with requirements? So you already talked about what are requirements, how we work with requirements, how to actually accelerate that in an agile environment. Where verification fits in is that, why is that important, is the fact that you should be looking at tightly integrating your requirements with your software testing process. And what do we mean by that is, one methodology is using requirements-based testing. And with requirements-based testing, what we're doing is we're actually creating tests that are derived from the actual requirements. So in a software environment, we have a term called test cases. And really what that is a set of conditions and variables that are usually documented that are used to determine whether a product features work. So for the motorcycle, for example, a test case could be the seat elevates from 6 inches to 12 inches. And then that would actually be a test case, and the tester would actually create that test case and actually perform the test based on the requirement. So why would we want to actually have this tight integration? First is that we want to actually improve the requirements. Lots of times requirements are loosely defined, sometimes they're poorly defined. And with a thorough process of review and clarification, we actually can verify that the intended requirement is met, as well as that we can basically look at removing ambiguities in requirements, and then hopefully overall is reducing the errors. So at the end of the day, based on tightly integrating your requirements with your testing process, you hope to improve your collaboration between the stakeholders, both your engineers, your analysts, and customers. So here's an example. So we have, and typically in software domain, we have Word documents, Excel spreadsheets. All of these are used to create requirements. Google Docs, for example, and we'll use, in this example, we'll use Polarion. These would be imported directly into Polarion as requirements. And then we would actually, based on that, within Polarion, create a set of test cases, as we mentioned, go through the test specifications, make sure that they actually meet the requirements, and then we would actually execute those tests. And then conversely, once the tests are complete, they'd actually be they would actually be linked and verified with the requirements in Polarion. So we've got seamless integration that's based on your requirements, and we can execute both manually and automatically. In this particular slide, what I wanted to demonstrate is the fact that a tightly integrated process of your verification with your requirements, what you're going to do is you're going to create a seamless integration between your business analysts, your product managers who are doing the product planning, with the testers, and the QA engineers that are actually doing the quality assurance, and all being managed within a central requirements management and testing operation platform. Next is integration of testing tools. So what is the integration of testing tools? Well, simply what it is, it's a system of, so it's an ecosystem of the various tools, whether they're testing tools or testing related, that you would use in testing phase of software, and then have them actually integrated together to actually develop your given product. So why is this is important? Streamlining the processes for increasing these efficiencies, what happens is that you'll create less duplication, less chance of miscommunication, and then hopefully less errors. Second is that because you're going to increase collaboration by using these tools integrated, is that you'll find your defects faster, be able to fix them faster, and reduce the risk by doing this at the beginning stages of development, as opposed to the end of the stages of your product, or even when the product has been released. And we all know of countless different scenarios. Lately in the automotive industry, there's been a lot of recalls, most of them due to software deficiencies in being able to find defects. So it's obviously very important. And then by actually using integrated ecosystem, what you're providing also is real-time visibility into your projects. And then between that, you can have communication that's between all your players, and that obviously will increase your productivity. And the last is better traceability, which Yurji mentioned in great detail. But from a testing point of view, is that you're linking all your testing results, so whether they pass, fail, and then all of those get linked to your test cases, which ultimately are linked back to your requirements. So what I have in this example here is I'm using Polarion QA as a central test management system. So this is the center here. It's the software testing platform, and it's managing all of the testing related activities. So number one is that I'd have my requirements that are created, whether they're external or internal, into Polarion, and they can be imported, exported, as Yurji mentioned, into the platform. And then second is that you can have internal and external test cases that are created. So in this case here, I have some Excel test cases, and they can be imported also into the Polarion platform. And then we have all these tests actually executed based on the requirements, and it's done both from an automatic point of view, manual, performance, and then all the results get captured and managed in your central test management platform. And then the last level, when we talked about verification, was the acceptance testing. So once all these tests have been actually performed, they've all been passed, and they've all been managed within the test management platform, your acceptance criteria has been approved, then a build is actually initiated for release, and that is how your product actually gets released at a quicker pace. I'm just going to check, see if we have some questions. So we have actually a question here. Let me just very quickly. Why use a test management tool rather than just MXL and Word? That is actually a great question. The reason why you look at a test management software tool is, in my opinion, and from various customer feedback, is that you usually have a set of systems that are going to be used for developing your software. And those systems don't include just Word doc, but they also will include scripts, and they could even include Notepad and online products and software. Having a platform such as Polarion QA allows you to actually manage all those activities from one central location. So you keep on using all your tools, and what's nice though is that you actually have something that manages all those tools from the end results. So if you have test automation, if you have performance testing, you're doing mobile testing, all those tools that you use to actually perform that testing still gets completed within those tools, but all the results get managed back in a centralized platform. So then you actually have an ability to have a bird's eye view of what's going on in the entire testing ecosystem, but also full traceability back to your requirements. And that is the intended reason why you want to verify, is to be able to actually determine whether all of your requirements have been met to what was intended. Any other
Great.
questions?
Yeah, I think there is one more question on the bottom. Is acceptance testing the sum of unit, module, and integration testing?
Good question. The acceptance testing, it can be that, but acceptance testing usually is defined by more than just the development process. So all the sum of all the parts, yes, does actually equal acceptance testing. So all those levels have to be completed, but stakeholders are going to also be external. So acceptance criteria can be much more than just the level of testing that's done in those four levels. So there might be some additional requirements that are based on external stakeholders. So a customer might actually have specific, or might be packaging or whatever. So, but yes, absolutely, those four levels of verification are definitely part of the acceptance criteria.
I think there are more questions, but they are related to the chapters we discussed before, so we can answer them at the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Good. So let's speak about requirements reused for a while. There has been several analysis being done by the analysts with different results. I mean, we get the information that 30 to 60% of requirements are actually being reused. It of course depends a lot on the actual product itself, on the industry. But as a result, we see that also many of our competitors and many different requirements management tools handle the requirements reuse. And I would like just to clarify a bit about what that there is not just the requirements reuse. You need to really to understand what are the needs and what are the reasons why you want to actually reuse the requirements. And then there are different techniques how the requirements needs to be actually reused. Next slide, please. So first reason why, I mean, we speak about requirements reuses is very simple. I mean, you might have different versions of your products, and you would like just to start with existing system and functional requirements when you start a new development. Similar, I mean, to that, because it also speaks about the system and functional and non-functional requirements for a product, is that you need to manage different product variants. But here the goal is that you actually would like to share as many of commonalities as possible. So instead of managing variants, you would like to manage commonalities. And there is another aspect of, or another reason why you would like to reuse some of the requirements, and this is simply the fact that there are many requirements being formulated and required by the regulatory standards. We speak about functional safety requirements, about environmental protection requirements, about security requirements, and you would like to simplify the way how those requirements are being formulated for all the products you need to manage. Next slide, please. Slide 31. So when we speak about distributing the regulatory requirements, that's kind of a bit simpler. Let's imagine that you have a safety requirement specification in your library. So you have a document, you can imagine it's a Word document, and you would like to publish this document to all your projects you manage. This sounds as a simple copy and paste procedure, but the problem is when the new specification is being issued and you need to promote or publish the updated specification to all the existing products. The issue will become more visible if you actually understand that the requirements have a content, as we describe. I mean, typically a description, the description of a need, and then there are additional meta information related to the requirement, a risk categorization, a status, estimation values, some kind of the categorization. You don't want to lose all those information just because, I mean, there were some new requirements being introduced or a few requirements have been modified. And that's why I think that this process gets more important to be really well managed by some requirements management tool like Polarion, that you can fully automate the publishing process in a way that you modify the requirements on one place in a library project, and then you have a full control of publishing different versions or different editions of your requirements to the projects where you want this new version to be published. And if you republish the version, you can still manage, or you do not lose all the information that is being managed with a specification in your project. So in this mode, we speak about the same requirement specification content being published to the different projects and ability to keep a track on additional meta information on top of so-called reused requirements. Next slide, please. On the other hand, if you speak about reusing requirements because you manage different variants, the story is very different. You would like to have a common system requirement specification with all the requirements that are, for example, defined for a drive pilot project. And then you would like to have two different variants, like the autopilot, the drive pilot for a car, and for a boat. And there might be some requirements that are simply more or less shared, and some of the requirements needs to be modified in a different context, or even some of the new requirements has to be created in a new context. And the goals here is to actually share as many of requirements without without copy and pasting requirements from one place to the other. So in this way, in this case, whenever I change the common system requirement, and this common system requirement is being part of my variant specification, the change is automatically propagated to a variant specification. Of course, I mean, you would probably need a better flexibility, the flexibility whether you want the change to be propagated live or on demand. So if you want to have the so-called auto promotion model, or if you want to promote the changes manually, this is all possible. But just, I mean, before we finish today, it's very important whenever you speak about reuse and sharing of requirements to understand that there are different needs, and different needs has different support in the tool itself. And with Polarion, you can successfully manage all these different reuse models, no matter if you speak about regulatory compliance, safety requirements, or if you speak about managing commonalities of your variants. Before we go to the Q&A, let's just finish with a slide 33. So that's just highlights, I mean, what are the most important capabilities of our solution. So first is that we were speaking a lot about requirements and QA. Actually, we provide also the full application lifecycle management solution, where all the modules, no matter we speak about Polarion requirements module or Polarion QA module, are tightly integrated in a single Aeon solution. And this gives a lot of transparency to the process. So whenever anyone change a requirement, this change is automatically visible to all other stakeholders. Of course, visible doesn't mean that it's being approved or it goes to the production immediately. The change needs to be managed through the workflow process. But the most important thing is that the full process is fully transparent to all the parties. When we were speaking about Microsoft Office on the beginning, I said that the reason why the people love to use so much Office documents is that because they are very easy to use. And we pay a lot of attention on making our product absolutely easy to use. And that's because, I said on the beginning that many of the requirements are being simply not written or not expressed in written form. And very often the reason is that it takes too much time to express the ideas, to write down the ideas in the requirements management systems, or to link requirements together so the information is more or less lost in the data repositories. We think that it's absolutely critical to provide the user interface that is very focused on the user interaction with the system and interaction of the users themselves. So how the information is being transferred from one individual to the other. And the third one is efficiency. You were speaking a lot about the traceability and the workflow and the process. A lot of that can be fully automated. It's also, when we speak about versioning, all the changes are automatically versioned. If you start writing your design requirements, they can be automatically traced to the system requirements that were selected before. That's similar to ease of use. Whatever can be really automated helps significantly with the final artifacts, and the project documentation provides much bigger value than just a plain document. Okay, so let's focus on questions now. We still have a couple of minutes. Rich, could you please moderate it?
Absolutely. So we have a couple questions actually have come in. Can you select what is reused into new projects?
Okay, so that's the question to do. Reuse management. Yes, sure. First, we don't speak only about requirements when we speak about reuse. So very often you need to reuse requirements, tests, verification procedures, and code itself. So yeah, you can reuse all of that between different projects. When we speak about the reuse of regulatory requirements, this is by default really document driven. When we speak about variants, you can really fully select, what you want to reuse from one variant to the other variant. It's very flexible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Yurji. Next question. Can you export the data to PDF format for distribution?
Sure. We do support export to Word and PDF when we speak about documents or reports. Very important is that many of our customers, as I said, needs to follow some regulations. They need to export to PDF because they need to develop specification for medical device embedded software development. The good thing is that we can export to PDF, but we also support different standards, for example, for electronic signatures. So not always the data needs to be exported out of Polarion. We often tell our clients they can actually access the information online. We also have a very low cost edition of our tool. We call it Polarion Reviewer, and with this license, you can access all the data on the web, provide the comments, review the data online. so you don't need to export it to PDF. But if you need to have a printed or exported project documentation, of course we export to PDF very well.
Okay, thanks, Yurji. We do have another question. This one's more for me. Can you integrate with test tools like HP Quality Center? Yes, we actually do integrate with HP Quality Center. And in fact, if you go to our website and look underneath, so it's Polarion.com, there is a extensions portal, and we have over 200 plus plugins and integrations that we integrate with. So various tools, the most common testing tools, test automation, and a whole list of 200 plus tools. Can your product have integration with Jira system? Kind of the same thing, but if you want to answer it, sure, go ahead, Yurji.
Yes, we do have the integration with many different tracking systems. Jira is one of the tools to integrate just out of the box easily.
Another great one about integration. Does the tool offer integration with source code and or application lifecycle management tools?
That's a very nice question. I would say I read it already. Um, yeah, Reg, could you please open slide number 4? It might help us to explain our product portfolio.
Sure.
We have the fully featured edition of Polarion called Polarion ALM, and this includes all the different capabilities you need to have in the ALM tool. So we have the requirements management module, variance management, testing quality management, change configuration, audit reports, and of course we also provide a traceability from the requirements down to the source code. The source code can be stored in a built-in version control management system that we provide with Polarion. It's based on some version. We also have connectors with other version control management systems like Git, Perforce, ClearCase, or Plastic SCM. So there is a full traceability from a requirement down to the source code, so you can actually estimate the impact on the code itself. The other products, Polarion Requirements and Polarion QA, the most important fact is that you can actually mix them in a single deployment. So, I mean, if you have business analysts that are working with Polarion Requirements product and quality assurance engineers that work with the Polarion QA product, they all share the same server-side backend. So all the requirements are instantly available for the quality assurance engineers. So it's up to the customer. I mean, how do they actually roll out Polarion? We have clients that started with the full ALM rollout. We have also clients that started with a subsystem like requirements or QA, and later they expanded to the full application lifecycle management area.
Okay, next question. Thank you, Yurji. Here is another good one. Is it possible to generate test cases from requirements in Polarion? Absolutely. One of the key features of Polarion actually is the tight integration between Polarion requirements and Polarion QA, and in fact Polarion ALM as a whole. As Yurji had mentioned in the presentation, everything is actually based on what's called a work item. And those work items are actually objects in Subversion that are labeled, whether it's a requirement or a QA test case or etc. So full integration and you can completely generate as many work items as you want from your requirements to your test cases. So yes, great question. And then there was another question from that same person. Is it possible to define specific properties for non-functional requirements? That's for you, Yurji.
Yes, principally, again, if you speak about a concept of a work items, so you can define what artifacts you manage inside of your system. You can say that you can manage just requirements and have the same properties for all the requirements. Or you can set up a different data model where you say you have an artifact type called, I don't know, functional requirement and non-functional requirement, and you can define a very different workflow and properties related to the different work item types. For example, if you speak about the software requirements, the software functional requirements, might be stateful, so you configure that the requirement needs to be implemented. You configure all the properties and the workflow related to the implementation process. And for a process requirement, you have a very different workflow and properties. So it's up to you. I mean, how the model is being defined. What's very important is that on one side it's very flexible. On the other side, we provide many different templates for uh, different needs. So no matter if you do waterfall or agile, if you do system or software development, we have a very large spectrum of templates that you can download from our portal. But all those templates can be easily customized by the clients themselves.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. I'm just going through them. It's almost top of the hour. What are non-functional requirements?
What are non-functional requirements? Non-functional requirements are, for example, those that do not really define a new function of the system. These are, for example, the security requirements, like for the web application, that the application needs to be implemented in a way that it doesn't allow the cross-site scripting attacks. Or you might have the performance requirements. It describes some criteria of how much data you need to support by your application, how many users needs to be supported. Of course, at the end, it all translates to the technology. But typically by non-functional requirements, we speak about requirements that do not describe the functionality like a feature or a user story, but more an aspect of the system that is orthogonal to the features itself. So it can be applied to any feature in general.
Okay, well, thank you, Reg and Yuri, for a very informative presentation. Thank you very much to everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar.
Thank you very much.